So in this final video, we discuss creating judgment tasks, and again we're kind of going from more theoretical towards more practical. So now we're really gonna look at some toy experiments that I created, and the idea is that you should be able to create an experiment of your own after this presentation. So basically, the order in which we'll discuss stuff is we kind of slightly abruptly finish the previous video with a discussion of the presentation mode. So basically, whether you do a printed out questionnaire or whether you do something computer-based, and we'll look at a very specific implementation of the computer-based presentation mode, which is the lexical decision task. And then we'll briefly turn to stimuli and instructions for subjects. And one of the reasons why we are looking at these things briefly is that very often it is highly dependent on the specific topic that you're focusing on, how you approach stimuli creation and instructions for subject. But still, there are some topics that are general, and we'll address those. Okay, so back to the presentation mode. Basically, where we stopped last time is the fact that 50 years ago, I guess, the only way to do this data collection was to have a printed out questionnaire, and then you ask people you either go and talk to people and then you fill in the answers, or you ask people to fill the questionnaire in. And one of the issues that are kind of inherent to this way of doing data collection is that you allow your subjects to analyze the questionnaire to extents that you might not like. What do I mean by that? They can go back and forth. They can, compare questions and try to figure out what the questionnaire is about. We don't want that usually. They can also overthink their answers. They can, spend more time on certain items, very little time on others, or just generally, do deep reflection on their answers, where you want them actually to spontaneously react to some items, and they can also, trivially, they can miss some of the questions, right? They can just not notice some of the questions, and then you get no answer, and then you don't know how to code that, whether that's an answer in itself, or it's just a matter of not having noticed the item. So all these issues can be resolved with a computer-based task presentation. For one thing, I think basically in whatever you use for computer-based task presentation, all questions will be presented, and you can also make the order in which they're presented random, which is one nice thing to control. So you don't want the order in which you presented the items to influence your results, and you can also make the questions, the answers, obligatory. So you can set it up in such a way that the participant cannot move on with the experiment if they haven't answered all the questions. So one example from Google Forms, which this is I'm just assuming this is the format that is kind of most commonly used, so most probable to be familiar for you. I just need to, I'll just open the Google form. There is the link in the presentation. You can just open this same file and copy it and use it for your purposes. So basically, here, if there is this red star next to items, this means that they are obligatory. So you can make this obligatory. I here made just a toy experiment with 4 items. And you can see, I advise you to basically open this, and if you're not familiar with Google Forms, just to see what the options are, so you can define what kind of answer you want and stuff like that. I mean, in what format you want your answer and stuff like that. Okay. What you can also make sure is happening is that one item at a time is visible. This is something that you cannot really do with Google Forms. But we'll see in a second another format, another website which enables this. And you can also limit time for answering, so that questions, for instance, disappear after a while. So one popular implementation of this computer-based task presentation, probably the most common type of task that is used, actually probably even more in psychology than in linguistics, is lexical decision task. So what happens in a lexical decision task, now we can use some of the vocabulary that we learned. So it's basically a computer-based yes-no task for words. So you see a word and you have to say whether it's a word of your language or not. There's always a training phase. So there's always a phase when you're exposed to some words and non-words, and you're asked to answer. And you're getting feedback so that you learn the task, so that you don't, so that you make sure that you don't misunderstand the task. You always get a single item on the screen presented to you. You have limited answering time, and reactions time generally gets recorded. And I will. So I created again a toy experiment on this website called Site Toolkit. So I will just need to do the same thing again. So I will just move to that website for a second. Okay, so here I created an experiment. It is one of the tasks for you if you're using the Upskills materials to go and check out how this works and visit the tutorial. But now I will just simply run the experiment just to show to you how it works. So basically, everything that the participant is seeing is this, and they have to click somewhere here to start, and then they get this instruction. So for 2 seconds, you will see a word. If it is a real English word, for instance, park, press Y. That's yes. If it is not an English word, for instance, slarp, press N. And then you have to press the spacebar to start the test. So I'm doing that. And now desk showed up. I'm saying I'm pressing Y. So now I'm pressing Y. So it says wrong response. So cookie is, let's say, yeah, I just thought for too long. Sweetity is something that I said it's not a word, and it wants me to believe that that's a word. So it says the training phase is over. The idea is I learned how to complete this task. And now for real. And I will see some items. I pressed Y. I pressed Y. I pressed no, and it was a word. I'm pressing no. Sorry, I'm pressing yes, so I'm getting a wrong response, and so on. And so basically, when the experiment is over, I, as someone who set up the experiment, can get it. Let me just make the window for you a bit bigger, so I can see here the condition, the item itself, reaction times, and the answers. So basically, you get all the. This is something that you predefine as someone who created the experiment. But the main thing here was just for you to see what it looks to be a participant in this experiment. So as you saw, it's a very controlled experiment in which you really don't have, much wiggle room. You just get very limited time, and you have to answer the yes/no question as to whether something is a word or not. Okay, back to our presentation. So having seen this very specific presentation of implementation of the computer-based presentation mode, we're going, and having completed the discussion of the presentation mode, we are looking now at stimuli, and this is basically something where something that you need to consider in every experiment. So the items that you're offering to your participants and asking them to react to them, those are your stimuli. In every study, you will have the test items, so the things that you will analyze. If you recall our study, those will be things like vividity and vividness and validness and things like that. You also have fillers, so these are additional items that you won't analyze. So you usually, so for instance, we didn't really define what we do with these items like rows, so these noun words. Those can actually be used as control items, but they can also be just disregarded. So basically, the main purpose of fillers is typically to distract the participant from really figuring out, okay, they're just testing this, and I will think of how I answer in general. I'll develop a strategy. We don't want that. So in some studies, you also have training items. We saw this. So there were items on which we were just learning how to do the task. Then there are control items. These can, for instance, be used for sanity checks. So, for instance, a word like rose. If you get a participant who answers yes to the question whether rose is a word, then you might want to exclude this participant because they have an indication that they're not really focusing on the task. And anchors, these are items for which you say, we in a way had this in our experiment because we said park is a word, LARP is not a word. It's a very trivial kind of anchor, but you can have more interesting anchors in Likert scale tasks, where you say, you're evaluating these words on a scale from 1 to 10, and then you give an example of a clear 10, of a clear 1, but you can also give an example of a clear 5, and then you're basically orienting your participants on the scale. When you're creating test items, what is always a good idea to do is to take factorial design into consideration. So you basically, what we did so far is we were comparing unusual ity words like hardity to unusual ness words like stupidness, but we never really considered normal words with ity and normal words with ness. And what if all words with ity get evaluated a bit worse than all words with ness? We would just never find that out. So this is why you always want to include also just normal words with ity and ness in this case. So basically, if there is usualness, to use that word, at stake, you really want to have items that are plus usual and minus usual of both ness and ity kinds, just to make sure that you're controlling also for the suffix as well. Okay, instructions for subjects. The last topic we are addressing. Basically, in every study, you want to describe the task, of course, and you want to try to capture the notion of acceptability that you're interested in. So, and that is not a trivial issue. So you might want to say something like, if someone used this, would it make them sound like a native speaker of your language? Something like that. You also, of course, want to thank the participants, and you want to do a GDPR statement. In some studies, you also might want to basically give some attention to what you don't want to know. So whether, for instance, the participant understands the item, violation of prescriptive grammar rules, dialectal variations, and so on. In some studies, you also include anchors. Finally, in the case of piloting, so if you're trying out your items before the actual experiment, what you might want to do is to ask your participants what they think the experiment is about, because sometimes you can find out that it's way too easy to find that out.